explores reality in tonight's lecture, The Illusionary War on Terror. Please welcome Nick Kollerstrom.
Thanks very much, and it's a pleasure and a privilege to be back here again at New Horizons. In this new century, we find that all the hopes and dreams that we had for the new millennium have somehow been wiped out by somebody else's agenda. Can you remember with all the hopes with which we look forward to the dawning of this new century, or all the mystery and awe? Was there going to be some world culture which we could learn to put an end to war and find out something about human fulfillment, and different nations would learn to get on together? Can you remember all those vague hopes we had? And now, how suddenly and bewilderingly different it all is. We've got 4 million CCTV cameras in this country, more than more surveyed than anywhere else in the world. How did all that happen? Was it our own fears and inadequacies that somehow led politicians to adopt this agenda? Or is it some alien force trying to take over? We see, or hear untruth from the politicians, and we're very bewildered. Do they really believe these things they are telling us? On the news now, terror and Al-Qaeda are the two commonest words, endlessly repeated, night after night. The title of my new article in the Master is "They Need Your Fear." That is the terrible primary imperative of politics. Why do they want your fear? Why can't they want us to try and find fulfilment? Basically, the last government that really believed and worked for human fulfilment was the old Harold Wilson government of the swinging 60s, who really believed in socialism, and they said no to war. Do you remember that? Americans asked them, will you help us in the Vietnam War? And they said no. And you can't imagine that in any more recent government. We live in a millennium where what my book calls the axis of evil, and that is basically Britain and America in its militaristic aspect, is dedicated to everlasting war. Sometimes the axis of evil is what I call MI6, Mossad and CIA, sort of unholy trinity. And there's a terrible deep connection between them. And in a way it comes out of an ethos that wars that have been fought in the past, it's ethical and okay to manufacture untruth, to help the troops to hate the enemy. All sorts of terrible untruths are fabricated. And the trouble is, if that's okay, you can't then switch it off in peacetime. You can't then stop them doing it. You don't have enough control over your intelligence agencies. And now they have far too much power. How much do we spend a year on the military? £45 billion? What on earth is that there for? Can you imagine this country living without an enemy? I ask you that. Can you imagine it being governable? Can you imagine anyone governing this country saying, oh look, let's all be happy together, let's share our resources and build pleasure domes and improve the kids' play areas and spend money on education? And that's what the government said it would do, but it actually started more and more wars. So we can hardly count how many wars this government has been in. And wars don't really benefit any of us, do they? If you ask all your friends, they say, well, no, we don't want the war. No, of course we don't want war. No, we want peace. But then the terrible thing is, the British can always be tricked into voting for the war and approving of the war, and they will believe in the illusory arguments given. Now you may say, well, that's been going on since time began, and it was described by Machiavelli about the way princes or the military create untruth to make people believe in the war. But in this digital era, there's a terrible new ability to create unreal images. And this began with the grand and archetypal event, we think, of 9/11, in all its awesome immensity. And this is a bid to take over control of the world. I know that sounds melodramatic, There's over 800 military bases in America all over the world now. It's quite hard to name a country that hasn't got an American military base. And that tremendous expansionism was made possible by the new enemy image. I asked earlier whether you could imagine Britain living without an enemy. Well, America had to do that for 9 or 10 difficult years in the 90s, didn't it? Remember, the communists had gone, the evil empire of communism had crumbled, and there wasn't yet a new enemy. And so that was a kind of crisis for the Pentagon. How could it go on? Its military budget kept increasing all through the 90s, and then finally 9/11 ratified and crystallised and gave birth to a new thing that everybody had to fear. And there's a terrible thing about British and American culture shares in common that imagine if you're a politician, how are you going to control everyone? How are you going to get them to listen to you? You appeal to the collectively shared enemy image out there. And now it's the Muslims, okay? Before that it was the communists, the Russians, before that it was the Germans. But there has to be somebody who we can blame things on, or the military can target. And this is what I'm asking if you can imagine this country without that. You know, there's a BBC film, The Power of Nightmares, a trilogy, which described how politicians who may not understand anything about what it means to be human, may not have any worthwhile dreams or visions for improving our lot that anyone would want to listen to for 5 minutes. They discovered they could control people by creating and projecting this sinister new menace, Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was dreamed up by the FBI in the late 90s, when no Arab organisation called itself by that name. Okay? And it started being, as it were, constructed, and agents were set to nourish this and sustain this image of a new worldwide menace, which 9/11 could then be blamed on. Now, there's been a wonderful truth movement in America that's taken apart all the details of that 9/11 event very, very thoroughly, and I'm sure you're all aware of books you can read about that that deconstruct that image. But the towers did crumble in about 10 seconds, turned into fine powdery dust, and there's no one here who can say how that happened, right? It's something pretty damn awesome, whoever could do that. They are, as it were, whoever could do that, believe that they're now taking control of our world. That's why they did it, to be able to project that awful empire. It's somewhat neocons and Zionists, international Zionism together, that somewhat create and project that kind of stupendous event. Let me ask you, how much is America now spending on the military each year?
$500 billion?
$500 million. That's quite good, yeah, it's a bit more than that. Obama signed $700 billion for the Pentagon, but there's also other military expenditure apart from the Pentagon, and so it's about $1 trillion a year. And that is more than the total amount of currency in America, okay? So it's pretty mind-boggling how a country can spend that much on the military, and how did it get into that situation. We've got about 40 different nations gathered with NATO fighting in Afghanistan. I mean, do you remember how that started? America said, oh, give us back Bin Laden or else we'll attack you. It made the fairly preposterous claim that this man in the Tora Bora Mountains had somehow caused the 9/11 event to happen. And the Taliban said, sure, we'll do that. Just give us some bit of evidence why you think he's responsible, because he's quite an important citizen, major donations. Give us some bit of evidence and we'll do it. And of course they couldn't, because they hadn't got it. And days went by, and eventually the British Foreign Office came out with a document saying, yes, Bin Laden done it. Bin Laden caused 9/11 to happen, and he's in Afghanistan. And that was literally days before the bombs started falling. So the axis of evil, Britain and America, always works in this synergistic manner, the intelligence agencies supporting each other. And you can hardly ask why did they do that? What the hell interest was it of Britain to support America in that respect? You can hardly ask that question. It's just they are interlocked together, okay? And because this new demonised enemy image, Al-Qaeda, did not really exist, it was just the phantom menace conjured up. Therefore, a series of further events had to be continually created to keep that enemy image going. Now you might say, well, that's ridiculous. Why does anyone want to create an enemy image? Why can't we just live in peace and enjoy life? Well...
Can't make any money out of that.
Can't make any money out of that, yeah. George Orwell's 1984 gave a very dire answer that we all hoped wouldn't come true, and it has come true. It's very much, it has 3 continents, and always there's a different enemy. We face one way and then another. That is very much the kind of logic whereby they have to mock up the enemy. So the next year, after 9/11, they had the Bali bomb. I don't know if you remember that. Its basic purpose was to get the Australians into the war against Iraq. They couldn't really see the point of it, and a whole lot of Australians got blown up in the bomb in Kuta Beach in Bali, and it was actually, so I may find this a bit hard to believe, it was actually a micro nuke that went off. It volatilized a whole lot of people, volatilized a whole lot of concrete buildings nearby, left a huge, quite a crater in the road that ordinary car bombs won't ever do. And they successfully managed to blame some patsy who was trying to make some sort of protest there. He was trying to cause some damage, but not in a way that would harm anybody. It's just a gesture. And they managed to frame him, called Amrotsi, and charge him with letting off a chemical bomb, some chemical chlorate or something in a car. Yeah. Well, it was about low, I think 10 kilotons or something, a very low yield nuclear weapon. And it was believed to be pure plutonium, but it wouldn't leave a lot of radiation, but it would definitely leave some. Well, that's a good question. It's believed to have come from Dimona, which is Israeli nuclear refining, nuclear processing centre.
Where in Israel? Any idea? Or is that secret, nobody really knows?
Well, Israel's got a huge nuclear weapons project, got a lot of uranium, and it would have bred that plutonium itself. It's very, very pure plutonium. And what they did, if you noticed the Bali event, they immediately let everybody walk across. They didn't seal off the blast area at all. Crowds could all walk across it to as it were, contaminate the area, and then they had the floods washing everything into the sea. To sort of get rid of the evidence, as it were. But there would, it's astonishing that they can have the confidence of doing that, and that the media will then report what they're told to report.
Of course. Was Mossad really involved in actually planting it then?
Well, it's hard to say. There isn't a lot of research on the Bali bomb, but Mossad agents probably turned up right away. FBI agents turned up immediately, even though it's right the other side of the world from America. They turned up immediately, and it's quite likely that Mossad agents were there too. But certainly the Bali police found the whole thing taken out of their hands by other agencies. Yeah. And the Prime Minister of Bali was instructed to make a statement denouncing Islamic terror, and she very courageously refused. She made a statement about America thinks they can do whatever they want and get away with it, so she wouldn't do that. But generally throughout Australia and Southeast Asia, it was used in stringent security measures. So a major purpose of these horse flag terror events is to boost the security and so-called anti-terror agencies. There's this very dire new concept of anti-terror police, who are probably the people who made the event happen in the first place. It's quite important to realise that.
In the northern parts of near Darwin, in the Northern Territory, there's an American military base there. And it's only a couple of hours to Bali because I've been along that way myself.
Oh, right, yeah.
So it would be very, very easy for them to get a small plane in with a small device like that.
Yeah. Well, there are videos. I've got a website, www.terrorontheTube.com.uk, and I've got a section on the Bali bomb there, and there are videos you can watch or films about the Bali bomb if you want some more detail on it.
See, in the Northern Territory, in Australia, notably in Darwin, the American military personnel do not need visas when they land in Darwin. They just walk in and out. So there's no track on them.
Right. Okay. I'm just trying to go through the major false flag terror events we've had, which the aim is to keep people in fear and to legitimise what the war makers do. Okay. The next major one was Madrid. I expect you all remember. I know this isn't a pleasant thing to go through, the bombing of the Madrid railway station, but the really important thing about that is that for about 5 days before that, NATO had been having its big yearly get-together of all the European NATO forces, about 5 days, and what they've been doing, well, they've been rehearsing anti-terror measures, and that means liaising, the military liaising with police in major capital cities. Now, after that explosion, everything was classified about that big NATO conference, and nothing is reported to the media. Okay, so not only can NATO have its big annual conference, annual practice and rehearsal, but it can make it secret so nobody's told about it. Now, this is very inimical to any possibility of peace, to have a military organisation, NATO, which is continually rehearsing war games. Because war games means that you have to have an enemy. You've got to formulate who you think is the enemy. And this should not be permissible in times of peace. So let's try to agree or resolve as conscientious citizens that we don't mind some sort of military alliance to reduce overall military expenditure and share costs, but we should not accept a military alliance which has big yearly war games, because that involves the enemy. Well, in this case, who are the enemy? Well, obviously the enemy is Al-Qaeda, which is imagined as being threatening cities, okay? So here you get a classic situation where the war game terror drill rehearsal actually makes the event happen. The very day after, within 24 hours of that, the very thing they've been drilling and rehearsing actually happens in Madrid, and you get something like 10 bombs blow up on several different railway stations. And you get the usual bunch of clueless patsies, Muslims, arrested, and it was a very long theatrical trial, and it wasn't actually arranged very well, because it was found that the person who supplied the bomb material, telephone call was going back to the telephone numbers, going back to the head of Spanish security. So there were direct connections to the Spanish police with the people who were arrested. So it's as if they didn't really arrange it very well, but they did manage to have a big theatrical trial of several months, and as usual, Muslims are put in jail. That's always the end of the story, right? They're put in jail, and you're never allowed to hear their story. You can't go and interview them. They're actually the people you really want to talk to and get their story of what do you think happened, and you're never allowed to do that.
Not in public interest.
Not in public interest, yeah. So Muslims remain silent, and they go to jail, and the case is solved, and we're supposed to be grateful for being protected from terror, okay? Now that has quite a lot in common with the London bombings, that Muslim Madrid event, okay, 2004. Okay, a year later, there was actually one in 2003, very less investigated, I don't know if you remember it, in Istanbul, in the British Embassy, and this is synchronised for Bush and Blair meeting together in London. They meet together, and I don't know if you remember, Bush and Blair are due to meet, and the whole British public is so enraged against Bush that he can't appear anywhere in public. I don't know if you remember that. I was also on the street demonstrating, and last we thought we'd got somewhere, Bush was trapped in Buckingham Palace. He literally couldn't get out. There wasn't even a photo opportunity anywhere. He'd just come from Australia, and there was so much anger, he could just be photographed waving, even though there weren't any crowds he was waving at. He could just do that. But in Britain, they couldn't do anything. They hadn't got any pictures of Bush. He was just trapped in Buckingham Palace.